Okay, last time I had spoken about legs in Robocraft, the role that they play, and also gave a glimpse as to the future that they could have. At the same time, via a community post, I reached out to the player base to give their thoughts on legs in Robocraft. That community post remains open to thoughts and discussion. Today I will be going over spinner parts and providing them a similar treatment. As an aside, today's footage is more representative of Robocraft's present balance, being more recent than the footage shared in concerning legs. While it is the side content, do enjoy the gameplays. Similarly to the legs video, I shall be linking to a community post where spinner parts stats, specifically those of hovers and rotors, as of January 2023, may be viewed and discussed, both in terms of evaluating them, as well as to provide your thoughts as to the direction that you think you might like to take them. Also, I shall at some point be linking to another community post where I outline the directions that I would personally like to see spinner parts taken towards, and hopefully also outlining any thoughts shared by you, the community, even if that should nudge spinners down a different path. With that out of the way, let us go over spinners, and now by spinners I am in fact referring to hovers and rotors as parts, for those who might have been confused so far, whether one calls them spinners or rotaries. Either way, that's kind of the classification. Also propellers, but those are speed boost parts and will be discussed at another point alongside thrusters. To get back to spinners, hovers are rather responsive movement parts that skim above the surface of the battlefield in 8 directions and are also able to change elevation within their hover height range, so in truth a total of 26 directions. They are strafe capable and are fairly fast and responsive, although they can be susceptible to flipping and consequent loss of control. Most of them have a small hitbox suited for embedding within a bot's build, and they are light in weight compared to most movement parts. It is typically the case that hover bots are made of medium blocks and equivalent chassis parts, but heavy blocks are not unheard of. Of all core movement parts, hovers are the ones most commonly used in complement to other movement parts, whether ground or air, both as a fallback movement part as well as a supplement movement part, an enhancer. Additionally, hovers are sometimes used towards the top of a top-heavy build so as to stabilize it. Rotors, on the other hand, are modestly slower than hovers, modestly less heavy, significantly more sluggish, and yet are able to fly. Also strafe capable, rotors are able to move in 26 directions also. They are about as light as hovers, but have a much bigger hitbox. Rotors also very significantly compensate for imbalances in a bot's center of mass. Effective copters were generally able to be built from any material, but are now mostly constricted to medium blocks and lighter, and this, thanks to the so-called balance discord of course, is being given a similar treatment to sprinter legs, with medium block builds becoming less and less viable. Rotors are also used to add flight capabilities to bots that otherwise would not have any, most notably leg bots such as mechs. On a thematic level, hovers and rotors are comparable to each other, and yet are quite different. Hovers are primarily a ground movement part, while rotors are an air movement part. That covers pure movement part bots, but there are many hybrid bot types that emerge from mixing and matching parts, and so it would do well to cover these also. As mentioned prior, hover movement parts are a common secondary movement part in many kinds of builds. They can serve as backup movement parts for leg bots, most notably mechs and sprinters whose legs are shot out. Hovers do interfere with the height of leg jumps, and can additionally lead to the glitch teleporting of the bot to places. They are less common in wheel or ski builds due to the base speed difference, but they work a little more decently with tank tracks. Again, hovers can provide backup movement, but perhaps more importantly, they can help to prevent flipping the track over in some circumstances. Ramping off from a height with a tank hoverbot kind of feels like a parachute moment, although that can mean a longer time in the air and being a prime target for flak. Hovers are also a popular choice with air parts. They are commonly paired with rudders so as to resolve their instability issue, and these make up the bulk of relatively true hovers. They are equally if not more commonly paired with rotors, again as a handy backup movement part for when rotors are lost, as well as to enhance maneuverability when at or below hover height. Just watch out for that suction effect that such copters can experience when crossing the hover height threshold into flight. Hover planes are also a thing that have gained favor, again granting enhanced maneuverability when below the hover height limit and serving as a convenient fallback for when the aerofoils get taken out. And one cannot mention aerofoils and hovers without mentioning Teslas. Hovers make Teslas so much more dangerous, as they greatly improve strafe and turning agility near the ground. Sure, such bots do lose out on climbing and diving angles, but they make up for it with tighter lateral turning angles. So there is that. Hovers have also long since featured in meta-candidate builds. Such would include leg hover rotor builds, as well as leg hover plane builds. Leg hover rotors, most notoriously but not exclusively sprinter hover rotors, and leg hover plane builds, again favouring sprinter legs. Coming back to rotors and switching focus, as mentioned before, rotors have a tendency of being paired with legs with the intention of enabling positional flight. This can be very handy for positional ranged loadouts such as rail or laser. I've not noticed rotors ever being used with ski, wheel or track bots, but I suppose that such might serve as a backup movement for when rotors get shut out. While rotors being paired with aerofoils is something occasionally seen, it is not a very popular choice. The rotors slow the base speed of aerofoils and are usually the first to go, and so any derotored copter plane regains aerofoil speed when that happens. It can be a little handy if strafing is highly desirable, but otherwise seems a little bit of an awkward fit. What rotors primarily have going for them, however, is that they enjoy full strafing capability, whereas aerofoils are faster, but generally one requires to turn the bot in order to gain sideways momentum. Okay, so that covers hovers and rotors, as well as most variants associated with these parts. Another dive into Diga Booster's master sheet of Robocraft's part stats is what comes next. And as an aside, I've linked Diga Booster's sheet in the description, as it is a very useful source of information about the full set of Robocraft parts. The actual stats for these spinner parts, or rotaries, are linked below. I will focus on the interesting aspects so as to keep things relatively short. Firstly, it is noted that hovers and rotors have very different stat block structures, meaning that while they may look thematically similar, it is likely that they were developed independently, more or less. One thing that both parts have in common, however, is an optimal carry mass field. The purpose of a carry mass differs from an agility carry limit. The former is calculated for the bot on the basis of the number of parts installed on the bot. On the other hand, the latter is calculated for the entire bot, independent of the number of parts. Take note of this difference, as it will prove relevant shortly. In any case, this field determines how much weight a single part can effectively carry. Starting with hovers, it is noted that they have a rather extensive set of agility-related fields that one could potentially tweak. The stat fields for hovers are quite extensive, and similarly to my take on insect legs in the previous video, I wish that my understanding of their individual impacts was better than it currently is, as I would feel more confident moving forwards. With that being said, hover stats outline the weight that a single part can carry, a value which is calculated additively with other carry weights for the parts. Actually, I do wonder if all movement parts with a carry weight value just share the same variable and calculate carry weight cumulatively. That would be odd, but not a deal breaker. With regards to turning, one finds three related fields: steering speed, turning scale, and tight turning scale. During the course of investigating this, I finally figured out what steering speed actually is. It actually refers to the base speed of the part while steering. This realization is real progress, and yet that leaves turning scale values to explain turning, and that is a little less clear. My best guess is that turn scale determines the rate of turning, while tight turning scale determines the turning circle that a bot must take when turning. Then again, there is also the turn torque value, and this seems like the best candidate for impacting the speed of turning, so perhaps turning scales determine minimum turning circles within which a speed penalty is applied. Perhaps. Moving on from steering, one comes to the fields that pertain to hover height, maximum hover height, and hover tolerance. These determine the height at which hovers operate and the amount of variation that the game will tolerate from a current set height. This tolerance is easier to notice with copters and helium blocks, where a floating build will heave upwards and downwards gently over time. This oscillation is likely determined by height tolerance. Acceleration, the rate at which height changes. These are self-explanatory enough fields. Braking multiplier is more interesting, and this indicates the rate at which a hover comes to a halt. And of course one comes to maximum angular velocity, which basically determines how quickly a hover part and the bot upon which it is attached rotates, with interesting impacts on various bots such as Teslas. Aside from that, one finds a number of force and damping force related fields, where the former dictate the amount of directional force that they exert upon a bot when control inputs are received, while damping forces impact resistance to changes in forces, and I am increasingly curious as to whether the stacking of forces of multiple movement parts with similar kinds of forces, or damping forces, might be triggering random teleports. It does seem that all teleport-prone builds have one movement part in common: hovers, and I am starting to look a little more closely at the braking force multiplier field. The reason why this is shall be apparent before all is said and done. So that was hovers. Let us move on to rotors. Like hovers, they have an optimal carry mass, but beyond this things begin to differ significantly. For this part, there are no fields that appear to mention forces or damping forces. Instead, there are acceleration values for height, strafe, and turning. Also, an acceleration value for leveling, which is what this movement part uses to correct deviations in bot orientation, and this helps to stabilize rotor bots. In hovers, the closest field that exists is called force offset, and in this regards I am unsure if that pertains to correcting deviations in hover height or being more flexible in how it applies its forces for self-stabilization. In truth, rotors are quite simple by comparison, presuming that there aren't a bunch of other fields that we don't know about yet. Well, this was kind of a crash course to the back end of spinners or rotaries in Robocraft. All of the various fields mentioned are among those which FreeJam could modify, again with the mass of the parts not being able to be modified as of at the moment. Now, keeping in mind that any ask of FreeJam to make adjustments needs to be taken with responsibility, it therefore would behoove any aspiring balancer to adjust with purpose. It is also important to be clear about that purpose. Change for the sake of change is not necessarily a good enough reason, as the modification of even a single part can have a knock-on effect on the balance of other parts, and the balance of bots, and the balance of the game as a whole. But neither should one shy away from seeking to expand one's understanding. It is through understanding that better changes and situations could come about. A better Robocraft, hopefully. One is bound to make mistakes along the way, but the attitude that one takes when making mistakes, to seek to avoid them, to acknowledge them readily, and to own them, is what sets apart the path chosen by that which calls itself a balanced Discord, and the path that I seek to forge. To come back to the balancing of spinners, or rotaries if you prefer to refer to them as such, I do like the sound of rotaries, I would appreciate if you were to look upon hovers and rotors and ask the questions. Where does this part fit in? What role should the part play on a bot that it is included upon? How does this movement part measure up against others? Do these parts carve a niche with their own identity? What issues, if any, do these parts introduce? Again, I would like you to try to think, not on behalf of how you would like the part to serve you. Rather, I would prefer that you think of how the movement part serves the game, or at least to think in terms of what would be in the best interests of the parts themselves. When this video continues, I will share my overall thoughts concerning the direction that I would like to take spinner parts. Do feel free to pause the video should you like to think about the balance of spinners without my influence. Have you given it thought? Continuing in 3, 2, 1. As with the discussion on legs, although less obviously so with spinners, if it were up to me, then I would not hesitate to clone each and every one of these parts with the aim of creating interesting variants of the parts. Cloning and statting parts could serve to enrich the game in ways that I don't think that most appreciate. Of course, doing so in meaningful ways is important. It would do no good to see a bunch of mild variants of the same hover parts, for instance. The quality of additions with significant contrast, as differing from a quantitative yet bland set of additions. So, beginning with hovers, I acknowledge that at least one person out there believes that hovers as of present do not need changes. To be fair, that person is at least somewhat correct. The situation as we know it is far from unplayable, and while there are problems, there are players whom still find enjoyment with the parts as they presently exist. With that being said, they do have a number of issues that I shall be attempting to address, ideally without ruining that which makes hovers good. One issue concerns the proportionality of power gain between different tiers of parts. Unlike most movement parts, the cost difference between different tiers of hovers is mostly a mere 2 CPU. And so it seems that it would be appropriate to similarly graduate the overall power gain between tiers of hovers more gradually than they have been. Now you might say, but PathForger, that's the point of tiers. The parts being set in different tiers is a good reason for higher tiers to be significantly more powerful than those of lower tiers. Well, that brings us to another problem that Robocraft has, which is the tier system itself. The fact is that Robocraft cannot afford to continue to split the player base through their choice of tiers implemented in times of a more active and larger player base. I will delve more deeply into this in a future video, but for the purpose of this balance video, it is my opinion that the overall power scaling that comes with part tier level should be made more gradual overall. Now, in the context of 6 tiers of hoverblades, a more gradual power gain poses challenges, especially so when there is so little CPU difference between the various tiers. As such, it is my view that one of the better ways forward with regards to hovers is to graduate between the tiers with not 1 but 2 points of evaluation in mind. In this case, part toughness and mobility, with higher tier parts enjoying greater mobility and lower tier parts being tougher overall by comparison. With that being said, another issue that really requires addressing with hovers is their tendency to glitch teleport across the map when paired with certain other kinds of movement parts, mainly but not exclusively insect legs and sprinter legs. Now, here we get into territory that is less well understood. The likely culprits here are the damping force fields, but one thing that kept bugging me is that it seems to specifically be hovers that triggers the glitch, and so therefore it must be an element which is unique to hovers. At the same time, my source has enlightened me to the possibility that which is causing the problem could be down to how suddenly a bot is stopping, and this narrows my focus down to a very particular value that seems to be unique to hovers, the brake multiplier field. It is presently my suspicion that the brake multiplier might be resulting in negative force values, which may be confusing the game into shifting the transform value of a given bot to an entirely different point in space, well, in game space. And so, in order to test this theory, brake multiplier is being reduced significantly. If the field is braking related, then this may result in an increased drift of a bot when letting go of controls or reversing directions, but I personally think that such is pretty thematic of a hover part. So that, hopefully, is another problem addressed, but the problems that need to be addressed do not end there. Oh no. The next problem to draw my attention was the unfortunate tendency of hover bots to flip over. To this end, 3 fields catch my attention. And I also recall the suggestion given by Sail, but ignored by the balance Discord of course, concerning the height at which hovers are disengaged. In short, for any hover with hovers installed at multiple heights of a build, there can arise a situation where the hovers higher in a build are disengaged while those lower in a build remain engaged, resulting in a rotary motion upon the bot that can lead to flipping. To this end, the 3 fields that catch my eye are the actual max hover heights of the hovers, the force offset, and the acceleration of the parts. If hovers remain engaged at a higher height, then they are less likely to flip unless operated at a higher height, and this is already seen with hovers being more stable when kept at a height lower than their maximum. At the same time, players of hovers will know how the best way to halt a flip is often to cease moving in whatever direction one is headed, which leads me to wonder if perhaps the acceleration of hovers is a little too high, and experimenting with damping forces concerning any kind of rotation also seems like an interesting enough prospect. To be clear, there is a fair bit of experimentation going on concerning that which I propose. I cannot make any guarantees that they will fix hovers, however, with some good faith and forewarning concerning the nature of the changes proposed, perhaps results could come in the form of an improved understanding and perhaps even an improved game. So all of that was just about hovers. Let me now speak of rotors, and this I feel shall prove to be a much simpler affair. The issues that face the part are pretty simple. On the one hand, one desires to address the ridiculous emerging situation where carry mass of a single rotor exceeds the heavyweight limit set for the heavy bot's agility limits. Unlike the agility limits, which are once again a fixed amount set for an entire bot, the carry weight capacity of a part scales with number of parts, and the CPU invested into those parts consequently. This fact alone should be enough to mark it as being the more logical field to adjust as compared to agility limits. This situation of token part supremacy, which the so-called balanced Discord has been feeding into update after update, is one that I would like to dismantle and set right. In doing so, I also address another issue with rotors, the relative incompatibility with part viability at the megabot scale. While certain individuals may claim that viability, let alone balance, at the megabot level is irrelevant, clearly I feel differently, and I would like to think that I am not alone. Should the balance at the megabot level come second to balance at the matchmaking compatible levels? Yes, to a point, but there would need to be an exceptionally good reason to do so, and I do not feel that either FreeJam or the community at large have received any such valid explanation, let alone a good reason, from the Balance Discord concerning this. Moving on. Again, as with hovers, rotors gain a degree of scaling with health and mobility as the two primary factors. Agility, weight handling, and speed are also brought in line with hovers. Agility values are adjusted such that light bots get a little more out of them, while heavy bots are more sluggish but remain playable. So there we have it. Unlike with the legs discussion, where an entirely new kind of mech was brought into being, these changes to spinner parts are expected to be a lot less dramatic in their impact, only modestly broadening and hopefully improving the feel of hoverbots and hover incorporating hybrid bots in general. So that's about it for the moment, and now over to you, the viewer. Did you come up with ideas concerning a plausible direction that rotary moving parts or spinners could be taken? What are your thoughts concerning the proposals for spinners outlined here? What impacts, if any, do you expect to see? Do let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I will meet you there, and, of course, thank you for watching.